Stan Lee is the man behind the incredible popularity of Marvel Comics. Starting in the 1940s, Lee virtually reinvented comic books, and his own life story is as exciting as the lives of the classic superheroes he helped create. Biography looks at the life of Stan Lee.
Spider-Man, Hulk. There's not a country in the world that doesn't know those names.
When you meet Stan, he's, to me, the only living Marvel comic hero on Earth.
Think about it, this man took a few short years to lay down the framework for characters and a popular mythology that would last for 30 years.
That's something about Stan Lee. You have the feeling that he doesn't want to be bored, and he doesn't want to bore you, and consequently, everything is new and exciting.
Stanley Martin Lieber, writer, editor. His dreams stifled by a boss devoid of vision. Then, one night, he's seized by all-consuming originality. Forsaking job security, he vents his creative spirit and revolutionizes an industry to become Stan Lee, the Comics Man. The life of Stan Lee is really two stories, and it begins not with Stan Lee, but with comic books. Comic books, as they're known today, evolved from comic strips in daily newspapers of the 1890s. One reason for their popularity was color, and the first to exploit it was Richard Outcault. His 1897 strip, The Yellow Kid, was so valuable that it sparked a circulation war. The reason? Comics sold papers. And when the movies were invented, animated comics, cartoons, began appearing on screen. In 1933, a printing company salesman named M.C. Gaines conjured a way to keep his presses running on weekends by reprinting daily strips as comic books. The gambit was sound, but needed a hero.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
Superman, published in 1938 by DC Comics, heralded the golden age of comics. Then, 2 years later, at competing Timely Comics, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby created Captain America, confirming the popularity of comic books. And that brings us to Stan Lee. He was born in Upper Manhattan on December 28, 1922, as Stanley Martin Lieber. The son of Jack and Celia Lieber, Stan was precocious, skipping grades and winning the New York Herald Tribune's essay contest 3 weeks running. Unlike his peers who devoured comics, young Stan preferred books, the classics of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Mark Twain, Arthur Conan Doyle, and more. He also loved movies and spent his free time at the local theater, absorbed in their tales of action and adventure. Fantasy was the only escape for young Stan. The Depression drove his father, Jack, a cutter in New York's garment trade, into chronic unemployment. His mother, Celia, held the Lieber home together, but Stan grew up a lonely child.
When I got to be about 8 or 10 or so, my folks did get me a two-wheel bike. And oh man, that was the greatest thing in my life. That gave me wheels. It gave me freedom. And when the summers came, I could ride all over the city. So that was terrific.
In 1931, his brother Larry was born. 9 years separated the boys, and so did their mother.
I remember in terms of Stan and myself, she always spoke so highly of Stan, talking about him. And at the time, I used to play a lot and run. She'd say, why don't you read books the way your brother does and be literate and be like Stan? And I had this feeling that Stan was a wonderful person. I remember she told me once when he was a child that one of the school teachers said about him something, he reminds me of our President Roosevelt. Well, that's a hell of a thing. My older brother was President Roosevelt. And as I said, I didn't really know him, so I think I built up a bit of a hero worship there.
I've always regretted that I was so much older than he, because it was a little tough for us to play together. You know, he was just an infant. He's a great guy, but I never got to know him as well as I would have wanted to.
After graduating high school in 1939, Stan looked for full-time work. A distant relative, magazine publisher Martin Goodman, needed a helper at one of his companies, Timely Comics. Stan arrived at Timely's cramped Manhattan offices just as editor Joe Simon and art director Jack Kirby were creating Captain America and preparing to leave.
After 10 issues, they quit over a financial dispute, starting another precedent for the industry. But by that time, an office boy named Stan Lee had been brought in.
Not taking comics seriously, Goodman gave his 18-year-old office boy a free hand. This capricious decision would soon change an entire industry. From 1941 on, Stan Lee and the history of comic books are one and the same.
I think Stan's first published story was in Captain America #3. Little text piece on Captain America, written by Stan Lee. It's byline, one of the first bylines ever in comics.
World War II interrupted the golden age of comics and punctuated the career of Stan Lee, who enlisted in 1942. The Army posted him stateside with the unusual classification of playwright. After the war, Stan returned to writing and editing comics, which by 1945 had become an industry without a focus.
The modus operandi of Marvel Comics or Timely Comics or Atlas Comics was find out what other people have got that's selling and strip mine the market, put out knockoffs of it.
We did war stories, romance stories, humor stories, horror stories, monster stories, little funny animal animated comic stories. Whatever was the trend at the moment, that's what we did.
It was also an industry without prestige.
When they started out, they were considered for kids because, like all native arts, they're demeaned at the outset, whether it's Grandma Moses painting or the banjo or the mystery stories, all of which are singularly American constructs. There are only about 5 real American folk arts, and comic books is one of them.
In those days, comics weren't thought of very highly, and I remember we'd go to parties, and somebody would walk over to me and say, "What do you do?" And I tried not to say, and I would say, "Oh, I'm a writer," and I'd walk away, but the person would follow me. "Well, what do you write?" And I'd say, "Oh, stories for young people." Walk away further, follow me. "What kind of stories?" "Magazine stories." "Well, what magazine?" At some point, I had to say comic books. And the person who had been interrogating me would, "Oh, I see," and turn around and leave me, you know?
One person he met at a party didn't walk away. She was actress-writer Joan Clayton Bucock. They met by accident and also by fate at a social gathering.
Well, it's a funny thing about how I met my wife. You know, I used to draw cartoons when I was very young, little drawings. And almost everybody who draws, every guy, I guess, you like to draw girls, and you usually draw your idealized girl's face. And there had been one face I had been drawing all the time.
And I remember it very clearly. He came to the door, and he had his raincoat thrown over his shoulder.
Joan opened the door. Now, she was not the girl that I was supposed to meet, but she was the head model there, and she was one. She opened the door and said,
"Hello." And he said, "Hello, I think I'm going to fall in love with you."
And I took one look at her, and it was the face I had been drawing all my life. And I think I said something stupid like, "I love you."
And I thought, this one I can't let get away.
Joan and Stan were married in time for Christmas, 1947. By the 1950s, comics returned with a vengeance, literally. Lurid, often violent books captured the imagination of kids and ignited the ire of their parents. In 1954, the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency investigated the comics.
It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
What happened between the heyday, the golden age of comics in '54, when they got censored and were driven underground, was Cotton Mather came again in the body of Frederick Wortham, a self-styled Looney Tunes psychiatrist who blamed everything. Blamed everything. Television was making kids rotten. Comic books were making kids rotten. Chewing gum was making kids rotten. Whatever it was, he never had the sense to understand that what was making kids rotten was stupid parents.
At that time, they said, your kids are going wrong because of comic books. And people ate this up. It was a very easy thing to sell to parents who couldn't control their kids. Well, parents are never able to control their kids. And before the 50s were out, we had the banning of horror comics and crime comics. We had the laundering of what was left. And of course, we all know there was no juvenile delinquency after that.
Goaded by Wortham, publishers devised the self-regulatory Comics Code. But by the late 50s, public hysteria had ended the golden age of comics. The surviving books, among them Martin Goodman's timely comics, were safe, approved, and boring. And nobody was more bored than Stan Lee. It would take a superhero to save him. And he got 4 to do the job.
Biography's look at X-Man Stan Lee will continue here on A&E. Our biography of X-Man Stan Lee continues here on A&E.
By the late 1950s, Stan Lee realized that he had been writing and editing comics for half his lifetime, and he was getting nowhere.
I was always wanting to quit the comics at some point or other. And I felt, you see, the publisher I worked for, he felt that comics are for young children, and he didn't really want vocabulary that was above the level of what he thought the readers would understand.
As the 60s began, comics were in decline. Stan was still employed, but he was mired in a creative slump, putting out books that were a struggle to read, let alone write.
One time he was very dissatisfied. He was just felt that he can't just go on doing this, what he thought was childish stuff. And then I said to him, well, why don't you create characters that you like?
The worst that'll happen is you'll get fired and you want to quit anyway. So get it out of your system. And that to me was a real epiphany. That's when we brought out the Fantastic Four.
The Fantastic Four, #1, appeared in 1961 for the newly renamed Marvel Comics.
Literally, the way the Fantastic Four started was because DC Comics had experimented with a book called the Justice League of America. Finally, the Justice League of America caught on. Martin Goodman's sources told them about the sales figures, and they went in one day and said, well, maybe we can try superheroes.
Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, possessing the ability to stretch. His wife, Sue Richards, the Invisible Girl. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. And Ben Grimm, the Thing. 4 friends become 4 freaks following an encounter with cosmic rays. The artist was Jack Kirby, who had returned to Marvel in 1959.
I think the greatest contribution I made in comics is the fact that I helped to build up readership. I think people have accepted me. They accepted my stories because I think they recognize their own values in those stories.
I don't think there's any artist in the field today who doesn't owe Jack something, who hadn't been inspired and perhaps inspired to become an artist by looking at Jack's artwork.
When I was 10 years old, Jack Kirby's Captain America come out, and as a 10-year-old with no knowledge of art, I was aware I was seeing something special. I would remark to my friends, look at this, they're popping out of the panels, they're jumping out of the book.
What made Jack Kirby so great, not so much his drawing. The drawing followed his ideas, rather. Usually people put technique before the ideas. I believe he put the intensity. He's a quiet man with a lot of energy within, and it poured out on the paper.
Jack Kirby was great. Jack Kirby was a genius, but Jack Kirby needed Stan Lee. So working together, the two of them, Jack Kirby, the artist, Stan, the writer, and Stan, the editor, couldn't beat that combination.
I don't know, Doc. Take it easy. You get yourself all worked.
In May 1962, The Incredible Hulk appeared, seen here in the 1966 animated television series. Dr. Bruce Banner, a brilliant physicist, is exposed to gamma radiation. Whenever he's pushed to an emotional state, he's transformed into his primal inner self, the Hulk.
And I remember the conversation I had with Jack Kirby when I told him about the Hulk. I'm surprised he didn't just walk out indignantly and say, forget it, Stan. I said, Jack, we're going to do a monster, but you know, I want you to draw me a sympathetic monster, kind of a good-looking monster that a reader can take to. And as I said it, I realized how stupid it sounded, but Jack never failed. I mean, he drew a Hulk that was so perfect and so sympathetic. The readers loved him, and today he's still one of our most popular heroes.
Doc, you're not Doc, are you?
When I was about 11, 12, I was a huge collector of comic books like the Hulk, Spider-Man, because I had two handicaps when I was young. I couldn't speak and I couldn't hear because I was born with a severe hearing loss. But the interesting thing is, when I used to read the Hulk comic books, it was an escape for me because I was an introverted child. And I can see many other children have the same problem, that they take themselves and their imagination and go into the Hulk.
The Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk opened a floodgate. Such artists as John Buscema, John Romita, and the reclusive Steve Ditko drew new characters as fast as Stan could write them. The collaboration was called the Marvel Method.
I would discuss the plot with the artist. The artist would then draw it without any script, just with the rough guidelines that I would have given him or her.
And many times I worked with Stan. When I worked with Stan, we worked right over the phone.
He's thinking of action and people doing things instead of it being simply a man is getting up and leaving the room, but as he's leaving the room with his left hand, he's doing this, with his right hand, he's doing something else, and I'm just glad he's not an octopus.
When the artwork was drawn in pencil, I would get it back again, and then I would put the dialogue and the captions in.
Though it was painful and terrifying, I found it was also very satisfying and great gratification when you succeeded.
So, had I had to write a full script from the inception, I might not have been able to do that many books. But using this system, which became known as the Marvel Method and was later adapted by just about all, adopted, I should say, by about all of the other companies, we were able to get a lot of work done in a short period of time.
Another Stan Lee collaboration involved his wife, Joan, their daughter, Joni. They nicknamed her J.C. after Joan and Stan's mother, Celia.
I painted the entire house pink because all I wanted was a girl. And then J.C. was born. She really, like most things, brought Stan and I closer because we're very much a threesome.
We had another daughter who unfortunately died shortly after birth. And because of that, I guess, we've thrown all our love just into Joni. Joan wasn't able to have any more.
I wished she'd had a sister or a brother because I think you needed to share. I think you needed to be able to share the love of a parent and be able to not be fearful when they die, but that's another story.
Between 1961 and 1962, Marvel's sales exploded from 7 to 13 million copies, inaugurating the Silver Age of comics. But Stan's creations were hampered by poor distribution. The web was spun so tight that his most famous superhero was almost never born.
Biography's look at X-Man Stan Lee will continue here on A&E. Our biography of X-Man Stan Lee continues here on A&E.
Spider-Man. He first appeared in the August 1962 issue of Amazing Fantasy, a series the publisher was canceling. High school student Peter Parker is bitten by a radioactive spider and acquires the ability of an arachnid. Peter's attempts to come to grips with his power and his life form the ongoing and offbeat saga of Spider-Man.
Peter Parker came from an effort on my part to do something that was even more different than the Fantastic Four or the Hulk. Knowing how I hate teenage sidekicks, I said, why not have a teenager who's the hero? Forget this sidekick business. Why couldn't a teenager have a superpower? I love that idea.
If Stan Lee is the voice of Marvel Comics, then for over 3 decades, Spider-Man has been the voice of Stan Lee.
I think I enjoyed starting the Spider-Man series more than any series I've ever started.
Spider-Man's appeal, as with all the characters Stan wrote, is his feet of clay.
He was this real guy. He was this kid who all of a sudden was thrown into this world where he had great responsibility. He had all this pressure on him. Gee, does it sound like the kid today?
I think audiences can really identify with these superheroes because of the fact that they ask questions, they doubt, they have low self-esteem, they need some money.
When I was a kid, I was a huge Spider-Man fan. I related to Peter Parker as, like I said, he was a normal guy. I could relate to him. He went to school. He had problems like I had. And yet he had this secret side, this heroic side, which sort of as, you know, a child, there's that psychology, you know, the dormant hero.
But dormant heroes have active villains as well as human troublemakers, such as Peter Parker's moody boss, J. Jonah Jameson.
Quick, somebody, what do I do to make this thing zoom in? Come on, hold still so I can focus in on your face.
What is J. Jonah Jameson like? I think, to put it mildly, he's a pompous ass. Certainly a pompous ass surrounding a limited, very limited brain, and a decent heart.
In trying to think of what problems would our superheroes have, I think I had the most fun with Spider-Man.
What about my ankle?
Look, I'm a doctor. You think I'm just here to treat people?
Forget it. It'll heal by itself.
Wait, where should I send your bill?
There's one thing that's always bothered me is when the police would capture somebody who's obviously a criminal. He's committed a crime, and yet they had to let him go because they didn't read him his rights or something. They didn't have a warrant. And I always felt, and I did this in 2 of the Spider-Man newspaper strips, I had Spider-Man comment about this.
It's Joe Doe, the gunman I caught robbing a jewelry store and holding a girl hostage.
If you caught him before, why isn't he in jail?
Because a cop forgot to read him his rights.
A killer was turned loose to kill again because of a technicality?
Welcome to modern jurisprudence, little friend.
And Stan made these people almost human. They had superpowers, but they were human, and they got hungry, and they had love problems, and like Stan said, once in a while they'd get a pimple on their nose.
Why does she always keep things from me? Look at these bills. And here I am thinking of things to buy for myself.
They talk about the Marvel Universe, and they say that they're superheroes who have human problems. Basically what they are is fetches with superhuman powers.
Why do I end up in the sewers? Ugh. Whoa! You don't find the Fantastic Four in a sewer.
To me, that made them much more interesting. They just weren't all powerful, all good, or even all bad. But there were shades of difference.
Last time I kicked your hide all over this town. Is your learning curve a flat line or what?
I mean, every time you turn around, Spider-Man is moaning, and going, oh boy, oh, is my life terrible? My Aunt May, she's got, you know, arteriosclerosis, and I haven't got a good bowel movement, and he does all that. Once in a while, I would love to see them happy.
By the late 60s, the Marvel offices, by then located on Madison Avenue, bulged at the seams.
There was a huge editorial staff and a big apparatus of secretaries and bookkeepers. And in one end of that floor, Stan Lee had an office, and Saul Brodsky and Flo Steinberg shared a couple of desks just outside that.
People started coming to the office, and in the early days, we didn't really have time for people to come to the office because we had work to do. Stan was writing, editing, talking. We didn't have time to chit-a-chat. So I would usually have to go out in the reception room and sort of stop them from trying to get through.
I would say there must have been about 25 guys in that room working. It was a real big room. There were maybe 4 or 5 editors. Stan was the editor-in-chief.
When an artist would come in and they would be working on the plot together, they would act it out, and Stan would jump on the desk and run around on the desk and make like he, you know, act the part of the superhero, and they would brainstorm, and there'd be all this noise, and, you know, sometimes if I were on the phone, I'd have to yell in there, keep it down, keep it down.
Yet, for all his success, Stan yearned for the one thing comics were denied: prestige. He would spend the next 20 years of his life pursuing it.
Scampi champagne. I like it.
Sparkling, delicious. No champagne tastes like Valedore.
Frankly, I think it tastes better than champagne.
One sip of Valedore, one sip says it all.
Dear car owners, next time someone tells you
you need new brakes,
come to Midas. We'll use our written 45-step brake inspection and explain your repair options so you can be involved in what the job will cost. That's the Midas way, the way it should be.
Hey, you okay? It's 3 o'clock.
I can't believe this heartburn. You and your Let's Go Mexican tonight.
You didn't take the Pepsid AC before you ate, did you?
Pepsid AC?
Yeah. Could have stopped your heartburn before it even started.
Oh, so I could actually be sleeping right now.
We could be sleeping.
We.
Take one now, and it controls acid all night long.
Oh, all night?
Mm-hmm. Water?
You're so good to me.
You can sleep heartburn-free with Pepsid AC.
Jumpin' Jehoshaphat! It's a week of biography for kids and the kid in every grown-up. Charles Schultz, Stan Lee, the real-life Pocahontas, Daniel Boone, and Davy Crockett. For a special biography junior, all this week at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific, only on A&E.
Once again, Jeep Grand Cherokee has emerged as four-wheel and off-road magazine's 4x4 of the year.
Do you dream in color? Hot pink, perhaps. Blue. Gold. Aquamarine. Ah, red. The big red boat. An all-inclusive dream vacation for your family for very little green. Free vacation guide? Call 800-AXP-TRIP.
Our biography of X-Man Stan Lee continues here on A&E.
By the early 70s, Stan Lee was king of the Marvel Universe, but he felt it was a realm without honor, so he embarked on a quest to win respect for his art and himself.
I used to give an example during my speeches. If Michelangelo and Shakespeare were alive today, And if Shakespeare said, "Hey, Mike, how about you and me doing a comic strip? I'll write it, you draw it." And Michelangelo said, "Great idea, Bill." And they sat down and they did a comic strip. Who would dare to say that wasn't an art form?
Stan, while he worked long and hard gaining respect for comics in his milieu, once he got that fame, once he hit the pinnacle, he's never retreated from it.
Stan's visibility on college campuses during the hippie era personified Marvel, but created unexpected ripples at the home office.
Dr. Strange became a big hit, and people would write in and say, "Oh, Dr. Strange must be on drugs," and we'd all look at each other and say, "Drugs? Drugs? What are they talking about? Drugs?" I mean, you know, we just didn't know any of that.
The 60s and 70s expanded comics as well as minds.
I suddenly discovered that there weren't no blacks in comics, that nobody had made a story about blacks. I felt that blacks had to be represented in comics as well as everywhere else. So I drew the Black Panther. I drew him as a powerful and virtuous character.
Following the Black Panther, Lee and Kirby added Luke Cage, hero for hire, to the Fantastic Four.
Luke Cage was the first black superhero to have his own book. I mean, it was a very interesting time for comics. The whole world was changing and stuff in terms of America. And once again, Marvel Comics stepped up to the plate and set a precedent.
And I don't think that should ever be forgotten. There were no real black superheroes, really good black superheroes.
I think it's very significant. I think it's significant to black children. I think it's significant to all children that the world of the comics affects the diverse world that we live in.
I'm happy to say that even though I was told, "Oh, you'll never sell these books in the South, and you'll never sell these books here, there, and everywhere," the books sold beautifully, which made me feel good about mankind in general.
By this time, Stan had become the comic industry's leading spokesman. His fame drove a wedge between the longtime collaborators.
There were interviews done that would interview Stan Lee. Stan would talk at length about how Jack contributed to the storylines, and the interview would come out saying, Stan Lee has all the ideas, Jack Kirby just draws up what Stan says. This is not true. It's something Stan never really maintained.
Kirby left Marvel in 1970. Meanwhile, a succession of new artists and writers took up the torch as Stan set his sights on other forms of storytelling. For 4 years, between 1978 and 1982, and later in 3 made-for-TV movies, The Incredible Hulk was a television phenomenon. It also became a lifelong identification for the twice-champion Mr. Universe, who played him from the heart.
You knew he was a great guy. He was innocent. It's not like, oh my God, it's Frankenstein with this other character where you get people to scream. But when you see him, you instantly identify that he's a harmless creature lost in the body, like Grigsby.
Superheroes are comics' most popular characters, but everyone knows they're fiction. In 1977, Stan brought real superheroes into the Marvel Universe in the form of the theatrical rock group KISS.
To get a phone call from Marvel Comics, which to me was Mount Olympus, you know. I grew up with Dr. Doom and the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and all that stuff, and Captain America. So you get a phone call from the house that gave birth to all that, saying, "We'd like you to join our staple," would be like Zeus inviting you to come and become one of the gods who walk the face of the earth.
But Zeus had a life outside Mount Olympus. At home, Stan and Joan saw their daughter J.C. blossom as a young writer and actress, even though growing up involved some competition.
All the children in the neighborhood wanted to come to my house, and they didn't want to leave once they arrived. And I think that it's been unjust to a whole community of parents how spectacular and larger than life mine have been.
I think she's a mixture of both of us. She's very talented,
think it's difficult being a child of two such strong parents. I think that's always difficult, and we are forceful.
Dad isn't someone who is insecure about his work or insecure about himself. And I remember, if anything, wanting to be a part of it, or wanting him to ask my opinion, or wanting to share in the, the process or in the art. But there was never the question or the conversation of it, because he's very, it's just between him and himself.
But not entirely. Since joining Marvel in 1940, Stan had always been Martin Goodman's employee. In 1968, Goodman had suddenly sold the company to Cadence Industries, a troubled conglomerate. By the early 80s, Cadence was a fiscal shambles. Once again, superheroes came to the rescue. They were called the X-Men. Born in the 60s, they steadily grew in popularity.
The X-Men were the ultimate for me because they were not only human beings, but they were complete outcasts, a new minority, mutants, not black, Jewish, Hispanic, whatever, mutants. Everybody hated them.
The X-Men, a group of mutants coalesced by Professor Charles Xavier into a crime-fighting team. The X-Men preach tolerance, even toward those who hate them because they're different.
Those first few issues sold magnificently. But what happened was, Jack and I started the strip. But for some reason, we didn't realize it was going to become as big a strip as it was. And Jack had other things to do, and he didn't have time to do the X-Men also. So I said, well, Jack, why don't you stay with the Fantastic Four and stay with Thor and with Nick Fury and whatever else he was doing. And I gave the X-Men to different artists who were good, but they weren't Jack Kirby. A few years later, new artists took it over, new writers. Chris Claremont at one point started writing it and did a magnificent job. And artists like John Byrne took it over and so forth. And it got a new surge of popularity. And today, the X-Men are the best-selling group of comic books, I guess, in the world.
Always seeking new horizons, in 1981, Stan moved the Marvel Universe, which had been headquartered in New York, to another planet. Hollywood greeted Stan with open arms, the same arms that had been holding his comics since they were kids. The first productions licensed from Marvel properties, however, were less than marvelous. What was missing was Stan's touch, but what was also missing was innocence. Innocence vanished in many ways in the 1980s. Comics went from fantasy to finance. Grown-ups used them to relive their childhood, and kids, it seemed, invested in them to ensure their retirement. Then Wall Street got interested.
About that time, the comic shops of America really started to take hold, and the industry changed dramatically. Cadence really didn't react to that during that time, and as the decade progressed, they eventually sold the company to New World Entertainment.
In 1988, financier Ronald Perlman bought Marvel Comics, and shortly thereafter, New World Entertainment. He then formed Marvel Films, headed by Stan Lee. For the first time since 1940, Stan was out of comics, but comics were not out of Stan Lee.
Our biography of X-Man Stan Lee continues here on A&E.
It only took them 30 years to get from newsprint to celluloid, but the X-Men captured Saturday morning TV in 1992, and 3 years later went 6 days a week. Originally, they were rebellious mutant teenagers with superpowers: Angel, Iceman, Marvel Girl, Cyclops, and Beast. Over the years and on TV, they became older, but they're still mutants and still rebellious. The X-Men's enduring appeal comes from their ever-changing composition. Like the Fantastic Four, who would occasionally take on extra help, the X-Men themselves adapted. Over the years, they added Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler. New heroes meeting new challenges, but still mutants facing old prejudices. In 1994, Spider-Man. This was actually Spidey's fourth time out. 3 earlier attempts had been made by others. This time, Stan vowed to get it right and brought in the experts.
I always say that the Spider-Man TV show is Playhouse 90 meets Beverly Hills 90210, in that we're doing, we're trying to do Chayefsky dramatically, and we are trying to do a little bit of soap opera, and then, oh yes, we're doing superhero action as well.
By and large, comic shows are written quite often by current or ex-comic book writers. They're reviewed by our editors. Stan looks at this stuff and makes sure that it's true to form. And I think that accounts for the reason that X-Men became the #1 or #2 show very quickly and has been followed by Spider-Man's preeminence in that same position. And here we have, after all these years, our 2 top comic lines being the top 2 comic shows on Saturday morning.
But even greater excitement was generated by the Spider-Man movie, long planned but mired in a rights dispute. The winner was the director of Aliens and the Terminator.
It's really about identity. It's about identity and values. And when you're 16, 17 years old, you're not accepting what you've been told. You're creating your own value system, and everybody does. And if you can do anything you want and nobody can stop you, and you're 17 years old, you better have a pretty good value system or you better find one.
I think what Jim Cameron brings to the Spider-Man film is that finally Stan and the folks in Hollywood that work on these projects found somebody who had a great, tremendous love and history with the character.
It does aspire to a kind of mythic proportion, certainly by the last reel, that I think takes it into that realm of it being a neo-myth, which is what comic books really are in their best form.
Today, comics are a valuable part of culture. That value stems in part from their rarity. And that rarity stems from mothers.
I don't know what there is about comics. It seems that every young person in the country, or every adult, at some time or other had his or her mother throw the comic books away.
The job of mothers is to throw away your comic books. The 3 things that mothers are supposed to do is give birth to you, make sure that you're fed, and to throw away your comic books before they become valuable.
The idea that they were for kids was promulgated for a long, long time. That's why everybody's mother threw out their comics, which are now worth $40 million a piece, and everybody cries and geschries about it.
And I see those comics now that I bought for 65 cents, for $20, and I had like 1,000,
My mother used to throw out my comic books, and to bring home that first issue of Kiss and show her, you remember those comic books you threw out? I'm one of them now.
Probably would buy another house for more with the money I could have made.
A day doesn't go by that I don't hear that at least once from somebody I meet.
In 1994, Stan and comics suffered a tragic loss with the death of Jack Kirby. A meddling third party spread rumors that Stan would not be welcome at Jack's funeral.
Stan had, in a very considerate gesture, had several people call to say, I'd like to attend the funeral. Is it okay? And they called me, and I said, fine, we want you there. I delivered the eulogy. And as he left, Jack's widow, Roz, called to him, Stan. She wanted to embrace him and show everyone that there was no hard feelings, there was no animosity, and Stan didn't hear her. And he just kept going out to the parking lot, and as we all milled to the parking lot, and he had to leave for a business appointment. Or I went out to try and drag him back in, and I couldn't get him. He was already gone. He was obviously very upset. His partner of many years had died.
There you are, you foolish girl. Thank you.
Today, Stan Lee's undiminished energy is focused on expanding the Marvel Universe, including his own label called Excelsior. His future is the uncharted realm of fantasy, explored every time a kid of any age finds adventure in the pages of a comic book. And yes, he finally has respect.
I think Stan's efforts were instrumental in creating something that was very contemporary and something that could be respected as an art form, as an entertainment form that allowed more people to enjoy it, and that in and by itself raised it to the level it is today.
What he did to it is what gave it life.
by putting in humor, by having those characters, by the way he did, he just wrote it very well and very personal, and it took off, and it just grew from then.
In my dealings with him, and I'm not an easy guy, as you may gather, Stan Lee has always been absolutely foursquare, absolutely straight. He has never lied to me. If he made me a promise, he did it.
He's more youthful now than when he began. He's to be admired, and bottom line, he's a terribly decent chap.
And he's healthy and energetic and talented and very happy being Stan Lee.
When I was a kid, I used to draw a lot. So I figured, hey, I'm going to try this for a while. I'll get some experience, and then I'll get out into the real world and get a real job. I never thought it would be permanent.
Despite his immense success, Stan Lee is down to earth. And unlike some of his superheroes, he is endearingly human. And although Hollywood filmmakers court him constantly, several of his characters have film deals in the works. But success has not gone to his head. Stan Lee still retains all the optimism and enthusiasm he started with more than 50 years ago. And now, let's see what's coming up on our next biography.